The Crusades, a series of religiously sanctioned mass migrations of European Christians into the Levant. Beginning in the 11th century, the aim was to recapture Jerusalem from Muslim rule. The expeditions were launched by the Latin Church in union with the Kingdom of France and the Kingdom of England. They resulted in the establishment of several Crusader states in the Levant that remained for centuries. This is our complete history of the Crusades. Part 1. The Call to Arms. In the 9th century, the Caliphate began its conquest of North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. Though they would not reach France or the rest of Europe, their presence was keenly felt in Italy, which was then divided into numerous independent states. In the south, the Byzantines ruled over the most easterly province of the Caliphate, while in the west, the Muslims pushed all the way to the Ebro River. Between these sat the Papal States, which were ruled directly by the Pope. As such, when news of the Muslim conquest reached the papacy, it was decided that something had to be done. In 801, Pope Leo III launched the First Crusade against the Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula. It would fail, but over the next 200 years, numerous other expeditions would follow until eventually the Iberian Peninsula was retaken from the Muslims. However, this was not the case for the Byzantine Empire, which instead was gradually strangled by the expanding Caliphate. By the middle of the 11th century, only a small slice of Anatolia remained in Byzantine hands. And so in 1064, when the Byzantine emperor requested military aid from the Pope to fight back against the Seljuks, he was refused. Instead, Pope Gregory VII suggested that the emperor should convert the Muslims of Anatolia to Christianity, a suggestion that would result in the First Crusade. Gregory called for a holy war in 1070 and managed to gain the support of the French and English kings, who saw an opportunity to increase their power and prestige by conquering the Levant. On November 27, 1075, Pope Urban II addressed his council in Clermont, France, and delivered one of the most famous speeches in history. In it, he said, "I, therefore, through the authority of Blessed Peter, summon you, servants of God, to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Let not the inhabitants of that land be troubled, however, by your coming. If they are willing to believe, let them be baptized. But if, as is probable, they remain impious and unrepentant after you have preached to them, if they choose rather to die than to renounce their sins, then, and in that case, only may they know that they have brought their perdition upon themselves." And thus the First Crusade was underway. Part 2. People of the Cloth. By 1077, a massive army of some 40,000 men had gathered at the French city of Paris ready to set sail across the Mediterranean and conquer the Levant. There were nobles, knights, peasants, even high-ranking clergy. Among them were Edhemar of Lapuy, a man destined to become one of the most important figures of the Crusades. He was a former abbot of a monastery who left his religious life behind to take up arms against the infidels. Another example was Robert, Count of Flanders, who abandoned his territory in order to join the Holy War. Then there was Peter the Hermit, middle-aged preacher whose fiery sermons in favor of the crusade attracted thousands of commoners, known as the People's Crusade. The poor and disenfranchised hoped that the Pope would deliver on his promise to forgive the sins of all who took part in the Holy War. Fortunately for them, Pope Urban was referring to those who died fighting against the Muslims, not those who survived. And so when the People's Crusade proved ineffective and many of the soldiers deserted to join more reputable armies, the true nature of the Crusades was revealed. Among the 40,000 men were Raymond of Aguilers, a young cleric who would write a history of the First Crusade, and Fulcher of Chartres, another chronicler who wrote about the siege of Antioch. These men are vital to understanding what happened next because their accounts of the Crusades are the only contemporary sources we have for this period. The Crusaders first landed in the Byzantine Empire in October of 1096. Soon after, though, they found themselves at war with the Byzantines as both sides blamed each other for the recent sack of Constantinople. Though the Crusaders lost a great number of men, they were ultimately victorious and marched on towards Anatolia. Here they met little resistance. The Seljuk Turks, having heard rumors of the size of the crusading army, fled before battle was joined, and so the Crusaders continued their advance towards Antioch, which they besieged in October of 1097. But the city as defenders were far more stubborn than their predecessors. Indeed, it wasn't until June of the following year that the Crusaders finally captured it. From Antioch, the Crusaders headed south. They ravaged the countryside and laid siege to several cities, before arriving at the gates of Jerusalem in July of 1099. After a siege of 5 months, the city fell and a bloodbath ensued. Entire families were slaughtered and corpses were tossed into the infamous Valley of the Swords. According to Raymond, around 10,000 people were killed. For this, Godfrey of Bouillon was proclaimed the first king of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. He and his fellow nobles divided the conquered territories among themselves, setting up a crusader state in the Levant that would last for almost 2 centuries. Part 3. New Kingdoms. During the reign of Godfrey, the kingdom grew significantly. Most of Syria was conquered, as was the coastal city of Tyre. Furthermore, a new order of holy warriors was formed known as the Knights Hospitaller, whose task was to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. However, when Godfrey died in 1100, the kingdom became increasingly unstable. It soon descended into civil war between the rival houses of Courtenay and Ibelin. Eventually, the latter emerged victorious and Baldwin I was crowned king. Under Baldwin, the kingdom entered into a golden age that lasted throughout the 12th century. It was during this time that the kingdoms of Jerusalem, Edessa, Antioch, and Tripoli were established. These were crusader states which, together with the county of Tripoli, formed the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the main protagonist of this video. The other 3 crusader states were established further east in the Levant, close to the Byzantine Empire, although they shared a similar fate to the Kingdom of Jerusalem, in that they were constantly under threat from the Muslims. They did differ in that they never managed to achieve any kind of stability. As such, the main crusader state throughout the 12th century was the Kingdom of Jerusalem, whose rulers held the title of King of Jerusalem. During the reign of Amalric I, the kingdom grew to encompass most of modern-day Israel and Palestine. It was also during his reign that the conflict with the Muslims intensified. The Ayyubid dynasty, which had conquered Egypt in 1174, now turned their attention to the crusader states. Part 4. Losing Ground. In 1183, Saladin led an invasion force into the Levant with the goal of reuniting it under Muslim rule. At first, the Crusaders were successful in stopping the tide of Muslim advance. But a few years later, Saladin was able to turn the tables and capture the Crusaders' stronghold of Carrick. It seemed as though the tide had turned against the Latin kingdom, and so King Guy of Lusignan called for help from Europe. Soon enough, a relief force arrived led by Louis VII. The 2 sides faced each other on July 2, 1187 at the Battle of Hattin. The Crusaders were utterly defeated. Saladin seized Jerusalem, forcing the remaining Christians to flee to the coastal cities of Jaffa and Acre. And so the Third Crusade was underway. The kings of France, England, and Germany assembled a massive army to take back Jerusalem from the Muslims. But despite their best efforts, they failed. Saladin resisted their every move and even managed to defeat the English king Richard the Lionheart at the Battle of Arsuf. Eventually, a truce was negotiated and Richard was allowed to keep the coastal city of Acre. But this was little consolation for the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which had been all but destroyed. Over the next decades, the Christian kingdoms in the Levant shrank drastically. Only the county of Tripoli remained strong, while the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Principality of Antioch became mere shadows of their former selves. In 1260, the Mamluk Sultanate invaded the Levant and crushed the last vestiges of the Crusader states. Soon after, the Mamluks captured Acre, ending the Latin occupation of the Levant. And that's the end of Part 4 and the end of the Crusades. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, comment, a sub for more. Thanks for watching.